You know, um, Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Right. We want it to be black and white.
Yes, precisely. Think about the engineering behind it. You fall, you break your arm, you go to the hospital,
Hmm.
and the technician slides you under the x-ray machine. A few minutes later, the doctor pulls up that stark black and white image on a screen.
Yeah. And there is a jagged white line across the bone.
Spot on. The doctor points at it and says, there it is. It is binary, broken or not broken. It is the clean, visible, undeniable fact.
And I mean, human beings find an immense amount of comfort in that kind of visual confirmation.
Oh, absolutely.
We like things to be categorized, neat, and observable. We want the data presented in a way that leaves no room for ambiguity. We want to possess the facts.
But then you step into the world of ancient biblical linguistics, and suddenly that x-ray machine is broken.
Yeah, completely shattered.
We are looking at a landscape of human thought that requires a completely different set of diagnostic tools. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
This is a deep dive into the linguistic and theological data behind a single Hebrew word. Today, we are looking at the root yada, which most English Bibles translate as to know.
That's the one.
And what catches my attention right away is the massive gap between our modern English concept of knowing and the ancient Hebrew reality.
It is a massive gap.
In modern English, when you and I talk about knowing something, it almost always implies holding isolated facts in your brain.
Right, like trivia.
Yeah, you memorize the capital of North Dakota, you know the Pythagorean theorem, you know the atomic weight of carbon.
Mm-hmm.
It is a mental possession, a trivia game. But when we open up the Hebrew text, knowing is not about winning Jeopardy.
Not at all.
It is quite literally a matter of life, death, divine election, and physical, tangible action.
And that tension is the perfect place to start. When we open up the comprehensive Hebrew lexicons to study this, we are not looking at some fringe, isolated concept that shows up once or twice in an obscure poetic book.
Right, it's everywhere.
It really is. The root yadas and its related dialects appear over 1,100 times in the Hebrew text.
Wow, over 1,000 times.
The sheer volume of usage is staggering. It shows up more than 800 times just in the most basic grammatical form of the verb.
That is a lot of data to sift through.
It is. And our aim today is to evaluate what this vast amount of textual data means for a Protestant Reformed understanding of God's sovereignty and human responsibility.
Right.
We are bringing this linguistic evidence into conversation with the Westminster Confession's view of saving faith and the divine decree.
Because I guess if we misunderstand what the biblical authors mean by knowledge,
We risk misunderstanding the very nature of faith, revelation, and salvation.
that is a heavy thought. So let us unpack this starting at the ground floor. Before we get into the heavy theological implications, we need to understand how the ancient Israelites used this word in everyday life.
Yeah, we have to start with the basics.
Looking at the most basic, bare-bones form of the verb, the primary definition is noticing, observing, or finding out information. It is incredibly sensory.
Extremely sensory.
The text cites Exodus 2.4 as a prime example. This is the famous scene in Egypt, Miriam, the older sister of baby Moses.
Right, she places his little papyrus basket in the reeds of the Nile River.
Yes, and the Hebrew text uses a form of yada to say she stood at a distance to know what would happen to him.
She is standing there, watching, taking in visual and auditory data.
Exactly. I mean, not exactly, but you get what I mean. Another example is Genesis 3.7, right after the fall in the garden.
Oh, yeah.
It says, the eyes of both of them were opened and they knew they were naked. Again, it is a sensory observation. They noticed their condition.
And the ancient Near Eastern context is incredibly helpful for understanding this sensory baseline.
How so?
Well, if we look at the surrounding cultures, we see clear linguistic parallels. In Akkadian, the word idu carries a similar meaning of perception.
Okay.
In Egyptian, the word ru means to perceive or to know. But what is fascinating is the physical prerequisite for this kind of perception.
Wait, prerequisite, like a condition that has to be met.
Yes. For you to know something in this sensory way, the object you are trying to know must be accessible to your senses. It cannot be hidden in darkness.
I see.
The text points to Isaiah 29.15, which speaks of those who try to hide their plans in darkness so that nobody will know them.
Because you cannot perceive what is obscured.
Right. The light has to hit the object, bounce off, and enter your eye.
Which brings us to a massive difference in how we understand human anatomy compared to the ancient Hebrews.
Oh, this is a huge shift.
If I ask a modern person today where perception happens, they will point to their head.
Right, they think of the brain.
Yeah, they will say the eyes gather the light, but the brain processes the image. But the primary organ of perception in Hebrew thought is not the brain.
Not at all.
The text highlights the heart. Deuteronomy 8.5 uses yada in direct connection with the heart, talking about considering or knowing a truth in your heart.
Yes.
The heart is the processing center. It is the seat of the will, the emotions, and the intellect all wrapped into one.
Yeah, the Hebrew anthropology does not split the human being into a cold, calculating brain and a warm, emotional heart.
Right.
The heart, the leb, does the thinking. And this creates a severe problem when things go wrong spiritually.
What kind of problem?
Well, the text notes that uncomprehending stubbornness literally gums up the eyes and the heart.
Gums them up. Wow.
It cites Isaiah 44.1, which is a devastating critique of idolaters. The prophet says they do not know, they do not understand, because their eyes are besmeared or shut, and their hearts cannot understand.
Let me test an analogy here to see if I am tracking with this concept of the blocked heart.
Sure, go ahead.
Think about modern data collection. You could build a massive computer server farm. It can gather millions of data points every single second.
You have the raw facts.
Right. But a computer has no heart to process what that data actually means for human existence.
No, it doesn't.
It has no moral center to evaluate the goodness or badness of the information. So if the human heart in the biblical worldview is the processor of reality, does a hardened heart prevent true knowledge, even if the sensory data hitting the eyes is perfectly clear?
Absolutely. The sensory data hits a brick wall.
Wow.
From a Reformed theological perspective, this is a vivid illustration of total depravity.
Okay, let's break that down.
Total depravity does not mean human beings are as evil as they could possibly be. It means every part of the human condition, including the intellect and the heart, is affected by the fall.
So the physical facts of God's creation are right in front of everyone.
Yes. Romans 1 says the invisible attributes of God are clearly perceived in the things that have been made. The data is accessible. The light is shining.
But without God's sovereign grace removing that blockage?
The human heart cannot truly perceive spiritual reality. The idolaters in Isaiah 44 can see the block of wood.
Right.
They can see themselves carving half of it into an idol and burning the other half to bake bread. The sensory data is 100% accurate.
But they possess no saving knowledge.
Because the organ of perception, the heart, is completely corrupted.
So having eyes to see is useless if the heart cannot process the reality of what is being seen.
Precisely.
But having the right data in your heart is also incomplete if you do not actually do anything with that information.
Right, which changes everything.
It changes how the ancient Hebrews talked about skill. We transition from this sensory observation to something much more hands-on.
Yes, very physical.
The word yada is used to describe technical capability and lived experience. The source material shows highly skilled individuals defined by this exact word.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, in Genesis 25.27, Esau is described as a skilled hunter, a yodeus said. He knows hunting. In 1 Kings 9.27, the text talks about skilled sailors who know the sea. And in Exodus 31.3, it refers to the artisans building the tabernacle. God fills them with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge, da'at, in all kinds of craftsmanship.
What stands out here is that knowledge in this context requires physical action.
It is not theoretical.
No, the text contrasts this lived capability with the ignorance of youth. It cites Deuteronomy 1.39, describing little children who do not yet know how to distinguish between good and bad.
They lack the lived experience.
Exactly. I mean, yes, that is spot on. But look at the artisans, the sailors, the hunters. They possess a knowledge that is proven by their physical output.
Right.
They do not just have academic theories about how to track a deer or how to navigate a ship by the stars.
They have the muscle memory.
They have the calluses on their hands. They have the tangible, physical results of their craft.
This makes me think about the massive difference between reading a physics textbook about how bicycles work versus actually getting on a bicycle and riding it.
Oh, that is a great comparison.
You could memorize the equations for gravity, momentum, and gyroscopic balance. You could ace a written exam on the mechanics of cycling.
Sure.
But the second you get on that narrow seat and push the pedals, if you do not have the muscle memory, you're going to crash into a mailbox.
You definitely are.
The person who rides the bike every day knows cycling in a way the physicist does not. The The knowledge is in their nervous system.
Yes.
So taking this visceral, hands-on definition of the word, how should you, as a reader of the biblical text, interpret commands to know God's law? It cannot just mean memorizing the Torah or passing a theology quiz.
It completely shifts our paradigm
Yeah.
of what it means to be a faithful person.
Yeah.
It moves belief from from just intellectual assent to practical capability and lived reality.
That is a big shift.
The text highlights that experiencing something is a primary form of knowing. It even applies this active experience to negative situations.
That's what?
Ezekiel 25.14 talks about Israel's enemies experiencing God's vengeance, and the text says they will know his vengeance. Hosea 9.7 speaks of Israel learning a bitter lesson. Again, the word is yada.
To know God's commands is to live them out.
Yes. Historically, theologians have broken down the concept of saving faith into 3 Latin categories.
Okay, lay them on me.
First, notitia, which is the mental understanding of the facts. Second, assensus, which is the agreement that those facts are true.
And the third?
Fiducia, which is a lived, active, personal trust. This biblical word yada absolutely demands that third category.
So if your knowledge does not manifest in the fingertips of your daily life,
You do not actually possess biblical knowledge.
and the intensity of that active lived experience reaches an absolute peak when we move from the workshop to human relationships.
Oh, yeah.
We move into the realm of extreme relational intimacy. The Hebrew text uses yada as a euphemism for sexual intercourse.
Right.
Anyone who grew up reading the King James Version of the Bible is familiar with the phrasing in Genesis 4.1. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived. The linguistic data explicitly links this Hebrew usage to parallel euphemisms in Arabic and Akkadian. It was a recognized Semitic idiom.
But we have to be very careful not to brush past this as a polite, prudish, cultural idiom.
It's more than that.
Much more. It is not just an ancient way of avoiding a sensitive topic. It stems directly from the contextual aspect of the word that we've been discussing.
Contactual, meaning contact.
Yes. Knowledge, in the Hebrew mindset, requires absolute vulnerability. It requires your physical presence. It requires the total removal of barriers between the subject and the object.
So you cannot know someone in this sense from a distance.
You cannot know them through a mediator. It is the most intense, private, and vulnerable knowledge 2 human beings can share, and it results in the creation of new life.
Wait, if this word implies that level of exclusive vulnerable intimacy, does that explain the prophet's obsession with marital metaphors?
How do you mean?
Is this why the biblical authors use marital unfaithfulness as the primary metaphor for idolatry? That has always seemed like a massive jump in logic to me. Why not just call idolatry treason against a king? Why call it adultery?
Because of the precise nature of the covenant. The text notes that not knowing Yahweh means apostasy. 1 Samuel 2.12 describes the wicked sons of Eli the priest by saying they did not know Yahweh.
Now, these men were priests serving in the tabernacle.
Right. They obviously had the intellectual data about God. They knew the sacrificial system. They knew the history of the Exodus.
But they lacked that covenantal intimacy.
Yes. The text also links this concept to Hosea 5.4, where apostasy is explicitly equated with the spirit of harlotry. Knowledge of God is exclusive intimacy.
So when Israel worships the Baals or the Asherah poles,
They are taking that exclusive, intimate knowledge and giving it to a false deity. It is a betrayal of the highest order.
because they were the only nation God brought into the bedchamber of his covenant.
Spot on. So worshiping another god is not just breaking a law, it is shattering a marriage.
That sets up the theological peak of this discussion. We have looked at human beings knowing things. We have looked at humans knowing trades and humans knowing each other. But the text shifts gears drastically when God is the subject of the verb yada. What does it mean when the creator of the universe knows someone?
This is where it gets really beautiful.
The source defines this as God taking care of someone, like in 2 Samuel 7.20, and specifically selecting or choosing them, as seen in Genesis 18.19 and Amos 3.2.
We really need to pause and examine Amos 3.2 closely.
Go for it.
Through the prophet Amos, God says to Israel, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth."
Okay.
Utilizing a reformed theological framework, we have to recognize that God's knowledge here cannot be simple omniscience. God is infinite. He knows that the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and the Assyrians exist.
Right. He knows the exact number of hairs on the heads of the Philistines.
Yes, but Amos says he only knew Israel. Therefore, this knowledge is the electing, distinguishing love of God.
Wow.
It is God determining from before the foundation of the world to set his special affection and his redemptive purpose on one specific group of people out of the mass of fallen humanity.
Let me see if I can clarify that distinction between general omniscience and electing knowledge with an analogy.
I'd love to hear it.
Imagine a powerful king ruling over a massive empire. He has an exhaustive registry, a detailed census of every single citizen in his realm.
Okay, he knows they all exist.
Right. He knows their addresses, their occupations, their tax brackets. He possesses perfect data about them, but he only knows his own son in a way that confers an inheritance, intimate love, and a permanent place at the royal table.
That is a perfect picture of it.
That intimate choosing knowledge is a completely different category from the census data. So when we apply this electing knowledge to the life of a Christian walking through a difficult week, what does this actually do for them?
It provides absolute, unshakable assurance. The data connects this concept to Exodus 33:12, where God tells Moses, "I know you by name."
I know you by name. That's huge.
To be known by name by the sovereign of the universe means you are entirely secure in his decree. Your salvation is not resting on your own fragile daily grip on God.
It rests on God's eternal electing grip on you.
He decided to know you. However, there is a very sobering side to this reality.
I was wondering when the other shoe would drop.
As the text notes regarding that exact verse in Amos 3:2, this electing knowledge brings terrifying accountability. Let us look at the second half of that verse.
What does it say?
God says, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities."
Oh.
Israel receives a stricter judgment, specifically because they were exclusively known. Privilege brings accountability.
So God disciplines those he loves and knows covenantally.
Yes, the surrounding nations are judged for their general wickedness, but Israel is judged for breaking a marriage vow.
That concept of accountability forces us to look at human behavior on a Tuesday morning. What happens when humans are the subject and God is the object? What does knowing Yahweh actually look like when you walk out your front door?
It looks like action.
The text shows that it involves highly practical, tangible behavior. It involves fearing him, executing justice, and keeping the covenant.
The primary passage the text cites for this behavioral reality is Jeremiah 22:16. God is speaking about the legacy of King Josiah, and he says, "He judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Is not this to know me?" says Yahweh.
Think about the weight of that statement. Judging the cause of the poor is what it means to know God.
It is not a secondary byproduct. It is not an extracurricular activity for advanced believers. It is the core demonstration of the knowledge itself.
That is intense.
Furthermore, the source points to the terrifying warnings in Hosea 4.1 and 4.6. God says there is no truth, no steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land.
And what happens as a result?
He says his people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, a lack of dot. The entire society is collapsing into violence, bloodshed, and theft.
Why? Not because they forgot the liturgy or the temple rituals.
Right. They are still offering sacrifices.
Yeah.
But they lost the moral, active knowledge of God.
You know, it is remarkably easy in our current cultural moment for people to claim completely orthodox theology.
Oh, very easy.
Someone can subscribe to the right confessions, argue brilliantly about the Greek and Hebrew on social media, and read massive volumes of systematic theology, while utterly failing to live justly in their own neighborhoods. They might ignore the vulnerable, exploit their workers, or harbor bitterness.
Which is a tragedy.
Based on what Jeremiah is saying, that defending the poor is knowing God, is it fair to say that an unjust person is literally an ignorant person, regardless of how many degrees they have on their wall?
Yes. The biblical text leaves no room for any other conclusion. The source specifically associates Elohim, the knowledge of God, with priestly instruction.
Okay.
True knowledge encompasses the statutes of Yahweh's law, which are intensely concerned with justice, honest weights and measures, caring for the immigrant, the widow, and the orphan.
So it's very practical.
In Reformed theology, we maintain a strict, vital distinction between justification and sanctification. We are justified by faith alone, not by our works of justice.
Right, that's a core tenet.
But we also insist, along with the Westminster Confession, that justification and sanctification cannot be separated. The faith that justifies is a faith that inevitably produces good works.
You cannot possess saving knowledge of God without it resulting in obedience.
If there is no justice in your life, there is no yada in your heart. The orthodoxy of the brain must be proved by the orthodoxy of the hands.
That is a stark warning. Let us take this concept of knowledge back to the very beginning of the human story. we need to look at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis 2.9 and Genesis 2.17.
This tree has puzzled readers for thousands of years.
Oh, yeah. The text we are working from outlines 4 major theories regarding what this specific knowledge actually was.
Let's hear 'em.
Theory 1 argues it was the capacity for ethical decision. Theory 2 suggests it was autonomous life-shaping. Theory 3 claims it was sexual experience. And Theory 4 proposes it was comprehensive cultural knowledge.
Evaluating these theories is absolutely vital for constructing a proper biblical anthropology.
Where do we start?
We can dismiss Theory 3 fairly quickly. The idea that the tree represents sexual experience was a common reading in some early ascetic circles, often tied to Adam and Eve suddenly realizing they were naked.
But that doesn't hold up.
No, because human reproduction, the command to be fruitful and multiply, was given before the fall.
Right. What about Theory 4?
Theory 4, comprehensive cultural knowledge, is simply too broad to fit the specific narrative of rebellion.
Okay, so we're left with 1 and 2.
Theory 1, ethical decision, gets closer to the truth. Knowing the difference between right and wrong is part of maturity. But the strongest position, which the text highlights, is the second theory.
Autonomous life-shaping.
Yes, the capacity to shape life based on autonomous decision. It is the desire to decide for oneself what is good and what is evil, entirely independent of the Creator's decree.
It sounds like the ultimate cosmic version of teenage rebellion.
Yeah, it really does.
Picture a 16-year-old sitting in the passenger seat while their father is driving down a winding mountain road. The teenager suddenly reaches over, grabs the steering wheel, and tries to force the car onto a different path. It is not just that the teenager wants a different piece of data about how the engine works.
Right.
It is a violent, desperate desire for independence. They want to be the one driving. They want to set the rules. They want absolute autonomy.
That captures the psychological dynamic of Genesis 3 perfectly.
Yeah.
When we look at the Westminster Confession's view of the fall, through the lens of this linguistic data, we see man seeking autonomy apart from God's decree.
Because man was created as a dependent creature.
Yes. He was designed to receive knowledge from God, to trust God's definition of good and evil. But at the tree, man attempted to seize that defining authority independently.
And the result was disastrous.
The text points to Job 28.23, which states that true wisdom, the deep structure of reality, was reserved for God alone. The human attempt to seize that wisdom autonomously did not bring enlightenment. It brought immediate death.
The serpent promised they would be like God, knowing good and evil.
But by grasping at a divine prerogative, they lost the true yada of fellowship with their maker. They got the autonomy they wanted, and it ruined them.
And that rupture in fellowship creates the massive crisis of the rest of the Bible. Because if man has severed the relationship, and his heart is now gummed up and hardened, as we discussed earlier, how can he ever know God again?
He can't, not on his own.
He cannot reach up and grab the knowledge. The text shifts our attention to the passive and causative forms of the Hebrew verb.
Yes, the Niphal and the Hiphil.
Right. The Niphal, which means to reveal oneself, and the Hiphil, which means to make known. The initiative, the action, has to come entirely from outside of us. It has to come from God.
And it does come from God, in a very specific, repeated pattern throughout the Old Testament. The text introduces us to what scholars call the prophetic recognition formula.
Recognition formula.
It is a phrase you will recognize immediately if you have read the prophets. The phrase is, that you may know that I am Yahweh.
Oh, yeah, that is everywhere.
The linguistic data points out an astonishing fact. This exact formula appears 78 times in the book of Ezekiel alone.
78 times.
It is also heavily concentrated in the Exodus narrative during the 10 plagues. It is God intervening directly in human history, causing spectacular and terrifying events to happen for the express purpose of forcing human beings to recognize His absolute sovereignty.
But wait, look at the vastly different people receiving that revelation.
How so?
Well, the plagues of Egypt forced Pharaoh to know God. The text explicitly says God multiplied his signs and wonders so the Egyptians would know he is Yahweh.
Right.
But on the other hand, the miraculous salvation at the Red Sea forced the Israelites to know God. It is the exact same recognition formula, but the experiences are worlds apart.
One group is drowning, and the other is walking on dry ground.
Are there two completely different kinds of knowledge happening simultaneously?
Yes, the subjective experience and the ultimate outcome of the knowledge are entirely different depending on the status of the individual before God.
So God's sovereignty over history guarantees that absolutely everyone will eventually acknowledge him.
The New Testament echoes this when it says, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. For the reprobate, like Pharaoh and his armies, they know him through sudden, crushing judgment.
Wow.
The text makes a fascinating linguistic note here regarding the negative phrase layada. It can mean unexpected or unawares, as seen in Isaiah 47:1, where disaster falls upon Babylon unexpectedly.
They do not see it coming.
They recognize God's sovereignty only when the hammer of divine justice strikes them. But for the elect, for the people of Israel crying out in slavery, they know him through salvation, deliverance, and covenantal grace.
The exact same revelation of God's authority results in terror for the wicked, but worship and profound gratitude for the redeemed.
Both groups are forced to recognize reality, but only one experiences that knowledge as life.
We're looking at the final sections of the linguistic data, and it concludes by contrasting true knowledge, which is dot in the wisdom literature, with false, illegitimate knowledge.
This is a crucial distinction.
In Proverbs 1.22, we see a stark contrast drawn in the sand. The wise man loves dot, but the fool hates it. True wisdom begins with the fear of Yahweh, but there is a dark shadow side to the human pursuit of knowledge. The text points out a derivative Hebrew word.
The Yidioni.
Yes, the Gideon. This translates to the familiar spirit, the ghost, or the soothsayer, which we see strictly forbidden in warnings like Leviticus 19.31.
The Yidioni represents the illegitimate, rebellious pursuit of knowledge. It is the human attempt to bypass God's ordained means of revelation.
Like trying to cheat the system.
In the ancient Near Eastern world, kings and commoners alike would consult mediums, necromancers, and familiar spirits to gain hidden knowledge about the future or the unseen spiritual realm.
And the root of the word is still yada.
Yes, because they are desperately seeking to know, but it is strictly forbidden by God. Why? Because seeking hidden knowledge through illicit, occultic means is an exact repeat of the rebellion in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, I see the connection now.
It is humanity once again grasping for divine prerogatives, trying to control the future without submitting to the divine person.
It is trying to find a shortcut, making a connection here. Seeking a Yidioni is like a student trying to cheat on a massive final exam using a stolen answer key.
Right.
Rather than sitting down, submitting to the teacher, and actually learning the material over the course of a semester, you want the results without the relationship. You want the data without the discipline.
That is precisely the issue. The book of Job points out in chapter 37, verse 16, that God alone is perfect in knowledge. He has all the answers to the cosmos.
But true knowledge is not something we can steal from him.
It is a gift granted by grace. Isaiah 11.2 prophesies about the coming Messiah, saying the Spirit of Yahweh will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Yahweh.
True knowledge requires absolute submission to the Creator.
It is a gift of the Holy Spirit, not a prize won by consulting the occult, reading astrological charts, or grasping at personal autonomy.
Bringing together this massive scope of discussion, we have traversed a vast linguistic and theological landscape today.
You really have.
To know, in the biblical Hebrew sense, is not just to pass a written exam on systematic theology. It means to see reality clearly with your eyes and process it with a soft, regenerated heart. It means to build and act with the calloused hands of practical skill. It means to love with the intense, vulnerable intimacy of a marriage bed.
Yeah.
It means to be specifically elected, chosen, and held by a sovereign God. And it means to execute tangible physical justice for the poor and vulnerable in the streets of your city.
And that leaves you, listening right now, with a final concept to mull over based on the text.
Lay it on us.
We live in a modern information age where we have access to more raw data on the phones in our pockets than any humans in the entire history of the world.
Yeah.
We are saturated with facts.
Absolutely.
But based on the rigorous biblical definition of yada we just examined, are we actually the most ignorant generation to ever walk the earth? If true knowledge requires moral action, covenantal relationship, and humble submission to God's absolute sovereignty, our massive data saturation might just be a brilliant disguise for terrible foolishness.
What a heavy thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us for this analysis, and we hope this deep dive into the text continues to shape your thinking throughout the week. Goodbye.